morning Adaora nearly walked past the old woman, she was already 20 minutes late and carrying 3 bags of groceries that were cutting red lines into her palms. She had taken the long route from the market on Jasper Avenue because the transit app said the 95 was delayed again. And she had told herself she would walk, that the cold was fine, that she could handle it. Edmonton in late October had other opinions. The wind came off the river valley like it had a grudge, and Adaora tucked her chin into her collar and kept her eyes on the cracked sidewalk ahead of her. That was how she almost missed her. The old woman was sitting on the bottom step of a townhouse on 107th Street, not wearing nearly enough for the weather. A thin cardigan, dark slacks, shoes that were meant for indoors. She had a small handbag on her lap, and she was holding it with both hands the way people hold things when they are not sure what else to do. Her face was turned toward the street, watching cars go by, but her eyes were not really watching anything. Adaora stopped. She told herself later that she almost didn't. She was late. She had a roast to start and laundry soaking in the tub, and a call she had already pushed back twice with her supervisor at the hospital. She had reasons. Good ones. The kind that feel solid until you actually use them. She put down 2 of the bags and crouched a little so she was at the woman's level. "Mama," she said, because that was how she had been raised. Every older woman was mama until told otherwise. "Are you all right? It is very cold out here." The woman looked at her slowly. Her eyes were brown and very clear, the kind of eyes that had seen a long time pass. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I cannot get back in." Adaora looked at the door. "You are locked out? My daughter-in-law changed the code," the woman said simply, without drama, which somehow made it worse. "She said she would call me when she was ready for me to come back." Adaora sat down on the cold step beside her. She did not make a decision exactly. She just sat, and when she sat, the old woman exhaled like something had been released. Her name was Mama Cecile. She had come from Accra 14 years ago to be close to her son, Kwame, who had married a woman named Priscilla and now lived in the south end of the city with 2 children. Mama Cecile was not allowed to bathe or feed without permission. She told Adaora this the way people tell things when they have been holding them a long time and the weight has simply become too much. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in pieces, one detail and then another, until the whole shape of something sad is sitting there between you. Adaora listened. The bags of groceries sat on the sidewalk and the cold got colder, and she listened. When Mama Cecile shivered, Adaora unwound the scarf from her own neck and put it around the older woman's shoulders without asking. Mama Cecile looked at it like it was something she hadn't expected to receive. "Come," Adaora said. "My place is 3 blocks. You will have tea while you wait. I don't want to trouble you." "You are not trouble," Adaora said. "You are a person sitting in the cold." Adaora lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like other people's cooking, and had a radiator that made sounds in the night, like it was thinking very hard about something. She had lived there for 2 years, since she came to Edmonton from Lagos to finish her nursing credentials. She had a small table and 4 chairs, which seemed like too many until the first time she had guests and realized she had also been hoping for exactly that. She made tea. She made the roast. Mama Cecile sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around the space the way older women sometimes watch young women in kitchens. Not judging exactly, more like remembering. "You cook like someone taught you properly," Mama Cecile said. "My mother," Adaora said. She believed that a woman who could not feed people could not take care of anything else either. Mama Cecile smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that changed the whole face. My mother said the same thing. They ate together. Adaora had not planned to eat with anyone that evening. She had planned to eat standing at the counter while reading a textbook, but she set 2 places, and they sat across from each other, and it felt, strangely, like the most natural thing. At 8 o'clock, Mama Cecile's phone rang. Priscilla's voice came through loud enough that Adaora could hear it from across the table. The code had been reset. She could come back now. Mama Cecile stood slowly, the way people stand when their joints remember too much. Adaora got her coat, her bag, walked her to the elevator. "You didn't have to do this," Mama Cecile said at the door. "Neither did you have to sit in the cold," Adaora said. "But here we both are." Mama Cecile took her hand and held it for a moment. God sees what people do, she said, even when no one else does, especially then. Adaora watched the elevator doors close. Then she went back inside and washed the dishes and tried not to think about how lonely that woman had looked on that step and how many times she had probably been put there. She never expected to see Mama Cecile again. The job at Northgate Medical Center had taken Adaora 3 application cycles to get, not because she wasn't qualified. Her supervisors at the placement hospital had written her the kind of references that made hiring managers call the referees back just to confirm. But because the job market for internationally trained nurses in Alberta had a particular kind of patience required of it, and Adaora had had to learn that patience the hard way. She had started in January in the internal medicine ward, and she had been careful with her charts, careful with her timing, careful with the way she spoke to patients and to colleagues, and especially to the charge nurses who held the real rhythm of the ward in their hands. She had learned early that being good at the work was necessary, but not sufficient. You also had to be easy to work with, or at least not hard. You had to find the line between confident and presumptuous, and that line moved, depending on the room. Her locker was next to a woman named Simone's. Simone had been at Northgate for 6 years and knew everything about everyone and had opinions about all of it. She was the kind of colleague who was either your greatest asset or your biggest problem, depending entirely on whether she liked you. She had decided early on that she liked Adaora, which Adaora had been grateful for in a way she tried not to show too, obviously. And then there was Margot. Margot had been at Northgate for 2 years, same as Adaora, and had applied for the same senior nursing position that had just been posted. Ward Coordinator, Internal Medicine. The job came with a different title and more responsibility, and a salary that would mean Adaora could finally stop doing the mental math every time she went to the grocery store. She had applied quietly, not telling many people, because she had learned to keep her ambitions close until she knew what ground she was standing on. She did not know that Margot had found out. She did not know a lot of things about Margot, it turned out. She had thought of her as a colleague in the neutral sense. Not close, not hostile, just someone who occupied the same professional space. Margot had always been pleasant enough in the break room, had always said good morning, had once lent Adaora a pen during a meeting and made a small joke about how the hospital bought terrible pens, and they had both laughed. The first sign was so small Adaora almost missed it. A patient in room 412, a Mr. Harlow, 73 years old, post-cardiac procedure, particular about his medication schedule, told the charge nurse, Sister Eileen, that the night nurse had skipped his 9 o'clock medication. The night nurse had been Adaora. Adaora knew she had not skipped it because she had the notes, had the timestamp, had stood there while Mr. Harlow had swallowed the pills and made a face about the water. Sister Eileen had looked into it, and it had been resolved. Chart confirmed. No further issue. Adaora had moved on. But then, a week later, there was a complaint from a family in room 408. They said a nurse had spoken to their mother dismissively, had not answered her call button for 45 minutes, had made her feel invisible. The nurse in question, according to the shift log, was Adaora. Adaora had not been assigned to room 408 that night. She had been in 402 through 411, and she had checked her call button response log, and everything was time-stamped and documented. She raised it. The ward manager, a quiet man named Mr. Beaumont, looked into it and found that yes, there had been an error in the initial report. Not Adaora's patient. Matter closed. But Mr. Beaumont did not look at her the same way after that. There is something that happens in a workplace when a person's name gets attached to complaints, even false ones, even ones that are later disproved. The name still echoes. People become slightly more watchful, slightly more cautious. They are not unkind exactly. They are just less certain, and that uncertainty changes everything. Adaora noticed it. She came home some nights and sat at her kitchen table in the dark for a little while before she could bring herself to turn on the lights. She told Simone because Simone was the only person she trusted inside those walls. Simone was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Margot put in for the coordinator job too. I know. Adaora said, and she has been very friendly lately with the people who make decisions, Simone said carefully. Adaora understood. She said nothing. She went back to her ward, and she was careful, more careful than before, and she documented everything twice. And she did her work with a particular kind of quiet intensity that people who are fighting for something they shouldn't have to fight for will recognize. But 3 weeks later, she was called into HR. The complaint this time was different. A medication error. A patient in room 415 had received the wrong dosage of a blood thinner, and the preliminary review pointed to Adaora's administration record. Except the record had a gap, a timestamp that didn't match the pharmacy log, a signature that looked like Adaora's, but that, when Adaora looked at it, something about the formation of the letters was slightly wrong. Just slightly, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you had written your own name 10,000 times and knew every habit of it. She said this in the HR meeting. She said it carefully, without accusation, just as an observation. The HR officer, a woman named Ms. Reeves, wrote it down. Mr. Beaumont was there. He looked at the table. 2 days later, Adaora was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. She sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for 30 minutes after they told her. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry, and too angry and too careful with herself, even alone in a car where no one could see. She had her credentials and her references and her documentation, and none of it was enough. Something had been done to her that she could not fully see, could not point to directly, and she was supposed to go home and wait. She drove home. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. And that was when her phone rang. The number was not one she knew. She almost let it go. But something made her answer. Perhaps because when everything feels like it is collapsing, even an unknown number feels like a possibility. Is this Adaora? The voice was older, warm, with an accent she recognized. Yes, she said slowly. Who is calling? It is Cecile, the voice said. You gave me tea once when I was sitting in the cold. You put your scarf around me. I have been thinking about you. Adaora closed her eyes. Mama Cecile, my son found your name in my phone. I hope it is not too much to call like this. I heard. My son told me. He has a friend who works at Northgate. He said there was a nurse from Nigeria who was having trouble. A pause. I thought of you. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I just thought of you. Adaora was quiet for a moment. How did you know it was me? I didn't, Mama Cecile said simply. But I called anyway. Kwame Asante had not spoken to his mother about her problems with Priscilla in any direct way. That was not how he had been raised. And some protections become invisible precisely because we build them so carefully. But he was not unaware. He had watched his mother become smaller in his house over the years, had watched her move around the edges of rooms that should have been hers too. He had told himself it was complicated. He had told himself there were two sides. He had let too much time pass. But Kwame had also, over the course of 14 years in Edmonton, built something. He had started as a warehouse supervisor, had studied part-time, had eventually become the regional operations director for a healthcare supply company, whose products were in every major hospital in Alberta. He knew people in medical administration the way people know neighbors in a small town, not always closely, but reliably. He called a man named Dr. Osi, who sat on the board of Northgate's parent health authority, not to intervene, just to ask quietly whether the investigation into a particular nursing staff member was being handled with full procedural rigor, whether all the documentation was being reviewed, whether the signature discrepancy had been sent for professional analysis. Dr. Osi was the kind of man who understood what was being asked without having to be told. The investigation expanded. What it found, over the following week, was not dramatic in the telling but devastating in its detail. Security camera footage from the medication room showed a figure entering outside Adaora's shift window. The figure was wearing scrubs that matched the night shift. The badge that had been scanned was Adaora's. But the badge, it turned out, had been cloned, the kind of cloning that required access and opportunity and a particular kind of deliberate intent. Simone, when interviewed, said she had noticed Adaora's badge missing from her locker for approximately 40 minutes on the afternoon in question. She had assumed Adaora had simply left it somewhere. She had not thought to mention it before because at the time she had not known there was anything to mention. When they pulled Margot's access records, there was a gap on that same afternoon, 20 minutes unaccounted for. Her explanation did not fully hold. It was not a confession. Investigations rarely end with confessions. But it was enough. Enough to clear Adaora's record completely. Enough to place a very different kind of scrutiny on Margot. Enough that by the time Adaora was called back in, 2 weeks after she had sat in the parking lot unable to move, Mr. Beaumont looked her in the eyes this time when he spoke. "We owe you an apology," he said. Adaora accepted it. She was gracious about it. She had learned, somewhere in her life, that being gracious about things that cost you a great deal is one of the harder forms of dignity and also one of the most important. She did not ask what would happen to Margot. She did not need to know. She went back to her ward, put on her badge, stood at the nurse's station for a moment just to feel the familiarity of it, and then she went to check on her patients. 3 weeks later, the ward coordinator position was offered to her. She had not expected it. Or rather, she had stopped expecting anything beyond simply getting back what had been taken, and the offer arrived beyond that, like a room she hadn't known was at the end of the hallway. Mr. Beaumont told her that her record under pressure had been noted, that her documentation had been what saved her, that the manner in which she had conducted herself throughout the investigation had been remarked upon by people she hadn't known were watching. She thanked him, and then went to the supply closet, off the break room, and stood there alone for 2 minutes, because she needed to be somewhere private to feel the full size of the relief. She called her mother in Lagos first. Her mother made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughing, and then she said, "I told you. I told you from the beginning." "You did," Adaora said. "Did you eat today?" her mother said, because that is what mothers do when they have been worried and the worry is over. They come back to the most fundamental forms of care. "I ate," Adaora said. "Mama, I am fine." She called Simone next, who said something unprintable, and then said it again more emphatically, and then told her to come over on Saturday so they could celebrate properly, which Adaora agreed to. And then she called Mama Cecile. The phone rang 4 times, and she was preparing herself to leave a message when the line picked up, and Mama Cecile's voice came through, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world to answer. "Adaora," she said, and somehow the way she said the name felt like being recognized in a very full sense of the word. "I wanted to tell you," Adaora said. "I wanted to make sure you knew." Mama Cecile was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am glad. I am not surprised, but I am very glad. I don't know how to thank you," Adaora said. "I don't think I have the words for it." "Then don't use words," Mama Cecile said. "Come for tea instead. Come on Sunday. My son will be home and I have been wanting him to meet you." Adaora smiled. "I will bring something." "You will bring nothing," Mama Cecile said firmly. "You have already brought enough." She went on Sunday. She brought plantain anyway, because you cannot go to an older woman's home with nothing in your hands. You simply cannot. Kwame opened the door. He was taller than she had imagined. She had not imagined him exactly, had only known him in the outline of what his mother had told her, with the kind of face that looks like it thinks a great deal and is careful about when to show it. He smiled when he saw the plantain. "She told you not to bring anything," he said. "She did," Adaora agreed. "She will be very pleased," he said, and stepped back to let her in. Mama Cecile was in the kitchen. She had made jollof and fried fish and a salad that no one would touch, which is the correct ratio. She had set the table with her good plates, the ones with the gold rim, and when Adaora walked in, she turned from the stove and opened her arms, and Adaora walked into them and held on for a moment longer than she had planned. The house felt different from what Adaora had imagined when Mama Cecile had described it. Still the same address, still Kwame's house, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. Priscilla was gone. Not long after the investigation at the hospital had concluded, Kwame told her over dinner, things at home had also come to a kind of necessary end. He said it simply, without too much detail, the way people speak about things that are still tender. He said his mother had spent too many years being made to feel like a visitor in a house that should have been partly hers, and that he had been too slow to see it, and that he was still making peace with that. Adaora nodded. She did not tell him what to feel about it. That was not hers to determine. They ate. They talked the way people talk when they are genuinely curious about each other, not performing interest, but actually paying attention. He asked about nursing, about the ward, about what it had been like to train in Lagos, and then have to recertify here, to do the whole thing twice over in a different country, with different rules and a different winter. She told him about the morning she had written her Canadian practical exam in a room full of strangers and sat in the car afterward eating a bag of ketchup chips, because it was the first Canadian food she had ever found comfort in, and she still wasn't sure exactly why. He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind you hear only when someone has been genuinely surprised by something. Mama Cecile watched all of this from across the table. She said very little during dinner. She ate her jollof and listened and occasionally made a sound that was somewhere between agreement and satisfaction, and her eyes were very bright. When Adaora got up to help clear the plates, Mama Cecile touched her arm. "Sit," she said. "Kwame will clear. He knows how to do it." Kwame gave his mother a look that said he absolutely knew what she was doing, and Mama Cecile returned it with a look that said she absolutely did not care. Adaora sat. "I have been thinking," Mama Cecile said, settling back in her chair with her tea, "about that evening on the step. You sat down next to me, you didn't have to. Most people would not have." "Most people would have," Adaora said. "No," Mama Cecile said, quietly but firmly. "They would not. I sat there for 40 minutes before you came. Several people walked by. One looked at me. They all had places to be." Adaora was quiet. "I am not saying this to make you feel special," Mama Cecile said, though her tone suggested she was also not saying that. "I am saying it because I think you should know what you did. I was so cold, not just the weather, you understand. The cold that comes from inside. And you sat down, you just sat." Adaora thought about that evening, the bags cutting her palms, the roast she was going to be late starting, the list of good reasons she had nearly used. "I almost kept walking," she said. Mama Cecile nodded. "Most things that matter happen in that almost," she said, "in the space between what we almost do and what we actually do." From the kitchen, there was the sound of water running, plates being stacked with reasonable care. Adaora looked at the table, at the good plates with the gold rim, at the small pot of tea between them. She thought about the parking lot, the 2 weeks of administrative leave, the morning she had sat in the dark before she could turn on the lights. She thought about the step on 107th Street, and the thin cardigan and the handbag held with both hands. She thought about how many things had to happen in a particular order for her to be sitting here, in this kitchen, with this woman, on a Sunday evening with plantain on the table that nobody had asked her to bring. "Mama Cecile," she said. "Thank you." Mama Cecile looked at her over the rim of her teacup. "Don't thank me," she said. "Thank the girl who stopped." And from the kitchen, Kwame's voice. "The plantain is excellent, by the way. I'm just saying." Mama Cecile's face opened into that smile. The real one, the one that changed everything, and Adaora laughed, and the radiator somewhere in the walls of the house made a sound like it was settling in for the night, and the tea was hot, and the evening was not over yet.